Plaisir maintenant d'accueillir Monsieur Ahmet Davutoglu. Alors, sorry, I'm trying to pronounce your name, but it's absolutely impossible for me to pronounce it correctly. But so I repeat, Professor Ahmet Davutoglu. It could be worse. It could be worse. Who is an old friend of us at IFRI. I say Professor Davutoglu because he used to be Professor of International Relations. And as you can imagine, he has been suffering a lot, observing the deterioration of international relations over the past few years. But meanwhile, he was Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Turkey, and he was very well known at the time not only to be a good expert on international affairs in general, but also as the author of the architect of a formidable, splendid foreign policy for Turkey, because at the time Turkey had only friends around, you know. And after he left, he was prime minister, but progressively the situation has changed so that now Turkey has only enemies around, or almost. So we are not going to talk about these sad developments, but Prime Minister Davutoglu will give his view on the global situation of the international system, but after that we will take 2 or 3 questions, and he does not refuse to answer more sensitive issues. So, Professor Davutoglu, Minister Davutoglu, Prime Minister Davutoglu, the floor is yours.
Dear participants, colleagues, excellencies, my dear friend Thierry, first of all, I want to congratulate Thierry and IFRI once more organizing such an important event on a very timely organization, and I want to express my thanks to IFRI, to French government, as well as to Moroccan government and His Majesty as well. Global governance is a big issue, big title. But before going into some details, I want to make a comparison between last year's meeting in Doha and this year's meeting in Marrakesh. Last year in my speech, in a very short statement, I made a reference to unpredictability in international relations. Unfortunately, in the last 1 year, this unpredictability has increased. Last year, the meeting was immediately after the election of President Trump. Everybody was worrying what will happen in the United States. I am sure that worry is still continuing, even growing, because yesterday even President Trump mentioned that Secretary Tillerson may not continue. So nobody knows what may happen. But one thing is clear, which I will make a special reference on national issue, that the relation between establishments and leaders. When we look at EU, last year we were talking more on Brexit. But this year, not only Brexit, we have the issue of Catalonia, and we don't know what will be the next. And also the 4 elections in last year in Europe, in Netherlands, Austria, Germany, and French, the rising trend of exclusivist right-wing parties is not only a worry for these nation states, but also for the basic values of European continent, of our continent. When we look at the Middle East, we had Qatari crisis, in fact, not Qatari, crisis in Gulf, an organization which has been very influential in the past and becoming a deepening organization in last 20 years. GCC first time became a problematic institution in itself. And one country of GCC was isolated by 2-3 other countries. And this is a problem of inefficiency in regional organizations. And last year we were talking over Aleppo, the humanitarian crisis in Aleppo. Aleppo has fallen, but we had still chemical use in Syria against civilians. The case is in UN, and UN has testified this fact. But also, we had a problem of Kurdish regional referendum in Iraq about the future of Iraq, and it was coincident. Same time, Catalonia and Kurdish region referendum brings new issues to nation states. And today, Prime Minister Hariri has resigned in Lebanon. So every day we are getting news from the Middle East, which makes the situation even more and more worrying. And this year also we have North Korea crisis rising. So when we look at the one-year agenda, there is almost no good news in the positive way of a global governance, even keeping the status quo as it is. But there is a rising psychological pessimism, which we, when I say we, not only Europeans, Asians, Turks, French, Moroccans, but we, all the representatives of humanity, statesmen, intellectuals, we have to think more and more about what will be happening next year or the other years. Nobody can make a rational analysis anymore because we don't have a rational analysis of the question what went wrong. I want to make a short summary in the last 27 years after Cold War, what has happened, through making an analogy of earthquake. We Turks, we know earthquake very well, and it is a good analogy to understand the systemic earthquake of international relations, which I call systemic earthquake, because there are certain signals. If you take caution, you may overcome. There are certain tragedies during the process and aftershocks. When we look at these, in the last 400 years, there were after conferences or new orders after big global wars, like Westphalian, 30 Years' War, Westphalian Order, Napoleonic Wars, Congress of Vienna, First World War, League of Nations, Second World War, United Nations. But what happened after Cold War, which was a global war, no such an arrangement has been done in international field. No new convention, no new reinstitutionalization of any international organization, not responding together to a set of principles to certain questions like terrorism, like nuclear weapon threat, etc. What happened in 27 years after the fall of Berlin Wall? The first earthquake was what I call geopolitical earthquake. 1991, when Soviet Union has collapsed. A geopolitical earthquake created many questions from Bosnia, Kosovo, Transnistria, Abkhazia, Nagorno-Karabakh. All the geopolitical zone has been shifted. And there was a huge hope of end of history, a new order. When we look today, that aftershocks of geopolitical earthquake is still continuing. Not any of these questions has been resolved yet. And plus, for example, Crimean issue is in the agenda on the same geopolitical zone, where territorial integrities, territorial control, and international recognized territories there is a gift, there is a gap between these. That creates a problem of nation-state territorial integrity. Second earthquake was security earthquake after 9/11 in 2001. Now, after 9/11, now 16 years passed, there was intervention in Afghanistan. The situation in Afghanistan is getting more and more risky every day. And the second one was intervention to Iraq. And recently, what we have been observing what is going on in Iraq regarding central government and regional Kurdish region. And also, there was only Al-Qaeda, but now we have Daesh, we have Boko Haram, we have Shabab, we have all type of terrorist organizations. So it means the aftershocks of that earthquake is still continuing. The third earthquake was economic earthquake in 2008, big global economic crisis. unemployment, political instabilities because of this crisis. There was a hope of a new financial architecture will be emerged. Nothing has been done in International Economic Organization except a few reforms in World Bank and IMF regarding representation of the countries. And the gap between G20, which I have attended almost all meetings in G20 in the last 10 years, the expectations of the decisions of the G20 has been not fulfilled. And also the gap between G20 and LDC countries is increasing. And when that gap is increasing, the refugee flow is increasing. Such an economic injustice cannot bring social or political stability. When there is such a gap, of course, poor countries' population will try to reach rich countries' economic area in order to get job, to survive. And fourth earthquake, which I call structural earthquake after Arab Spring in the Middle East especially. The nation states have collapsed. Fragile states did emerge. And still, the consequences are on the agenda. Since we have not been able to resolve these four earthquakes, now all the aftershocks of these four earthquakes came together and created a systemic earthquake, now what we are facing. Now there is a systemic problem, and we have to approach to this problem not by conjecture or just one country based or one region based. What we are facing today is the most dangerous, risky situation in modern time, because the means of destruction is much more threatening, not like old middle centuries war is there. Even one country, North Korea, and one crazy person can threaten everybody. So now what we need, I want to mention three levels and some principles on global governance, what we can do. First, national level. Today we have a problem of identity and legitimacy and also national functioning of institutions on national level. Thierry made a reference to my policy of zero problems with neighbors. Yes, when we came to power in 2002 in Turkey, meanwhile, I want to just make one sentence regarding Turkey. Turkey has been right at the center of all these earthquakes, like Bosnia crisis, Kosovo crisis, Georgia crisis in first earthquake, next door to Turkey. The war in Iraq and Afghanistan, Turkey was part of Afghanistan war, sent military, and was affected by Iraq, intervention in Iraq. Economic crisis, European market is the first target of Turkish economy. Again, Turkey has been affected. Of course, Middle Eastern issue, structural earthquake, has affected Turkey. So we are right at the center of all these earthquakes, and we are trying to survive on one hand and try to control crisis on the other hand. In our first years of our government, we were not only able to stabilize the country, but also we were very effective in regional issues. On the way, I was telling to Thierry, because of Lebanese crisis, in 2008, May, 17th of May, I was chief advisor, not yet minister. We declared two diplomatic achievements at the same time, same day. One was Israeli-Syrian indirect talks, which I was the mediator between two sides as chief advisor. Secondly, resolving the presidential crisis in Lebanon. Michel Suleiman became president, together with Qatar. So why do we have now a problem? Not because Turkey has changed policy, but today we don't have counterparts to make peace or mediate. In Syria, around Turkey, 7 countries do not have full control over their territories. Syria, Iraq, central government, they do not have full control. Libya, Yemen, Lebanon, Georgia is a stable country, but there is an international dispute. It is not able to control the internationally recognized territories. Ukraine, the tension is continuing. With the countries where there is stability, still we have good relations trying to keep that. So the problem is there is no real counterpart on the others. If you don't have counterpart, you cannot have diplomacy proper manner. You can have micro diplomacy with every group in Syria or in Iraq. This is a basic challenge. So national level, there are fragile states like Syria, Libya, Yemen. There are states which do not have full control over territories. There are states which have serious identity problems like in Iraq, like even now in Spain, what is the situation is continuing, being Catalan, being Spanish, being European, different levels of identities. There is rising exclusivist, Islamophobic, xenophobic tendencies in Europe. And also, there is a problem between leaders and establishments like what we are observing sometimes in the United States, which is a global power and affects everything in the world, which stability and what direction of American foreign policy is very important for international stability. But President Obama and President Trump, two different approaches to the international issues, which will bring national interest as an issue of global, a problem of global choices. Regional dimension, what we have to do for national level, I will come to certain principles. Regional dimension, today, we don't have a global system of international arrangement. International means international state. But since there are problems in nation states, international system is not functioning properly. And for global governance, the main barrier is today we have much more balance of power system, but not one balance of power system like 19th century. What we have today is several balances of powers are at the same time. Regional balances of power and global balances of power. When they match, you can find a solution. In Middle East today, there is a regional balance of power, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, inside GCC, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, etc. But also there is a general balance of power between Russia, EU, US, and there is no international adjustment people could come together. And success stories like EU and GCC are facing serious crisis. So regionally there are instabilities, and regional international organizations like Arab League, like OIC, like GCC, like EU is not as effective as before. Global level, lastly, what we are facing is, as I said, what we need to do today is a new global set of conventions where everybody agrees upon. And there will be no exclusivity of these. I want to give one striking example which really hurts very much. In my heart, I feel the pain. During the hard times of Syrian crisis, when chemical weapon was used against civilians in 2013, in one meeting I addressed to my colleagues, and I said, we may disagree on the future of Syria or on certain issues, but at least on two issues, we have to agree together. One is humanitarian access. The other one is acting together against war crimes. These are not national interest issues. These are international conventional issues. Whoever prevents humanitarian access must be punished. Regime, opposition, whatever is. Or whoever commits a war crime using chemical weapons must be punished. This is UN principles. But unfortunately, what happened? Neither war crimes being punished, nor humanitarian access being achieved. So millions of refugees escaped Syria, and Turkey has suffered as a neighboring country. Today, those who are criticizing Turkey must know that we are hosting almost 4 million Syrian refugees. You can imagine the cost on our economy. You can imagine the humanitarian. There are certain Turkish cities now, like Kilis. The Syrians are more than Turks. But you don't have any racist approach in Turkey. This is a big issue in conventions. The institutional today UN, nobody expects any solution from UN, not because of the inefficiency of UN Secretary General. I know Antonio Guterres. He is the right person to be Secretary General. When he was UNHCR chairman, he did extraordinary work. And I know him personally. He has all the abilities to do everything. Right person, right place. But UN Security Council is today reflecting a balance of power rather than internationally agreed conventions together. And therefore, UN, just to a striking reflection of this is, today, the only mechanism regarding Syria question is the mechanism of Astana, where Turkey, Russia, and Iran are running a diplomacy to have no conflict zones in Syria, and there is no hope from UN mediation. It means ad hoc systems are coming, ad hoc solutions. This is basically the problem of global institutions. What we need today is more effective institutional mechanisms in UN and also in international economic organizations. Since there is a time limit, I want to give 5 principles for a future global governance, and I will stop there. One is inclusivity. 5 I's, I say in one of my articles. Inclusivity. We need to have an inclusive national, regional, and global order, not populist, exclusivist. Secondly, integrity. We have to have, we should not be having double standards. All the principles should be followed by integrity. These are ideals. And the other 2 principles are more realpolitik, interest optimization. Today, what is absent is rational negotiation. There is no rational negotiation anymore. More emotional reflections are in international arena. And 4th, after interest optimization, implementation of decisions. Not just taking decisions, but implementation. And the last is a new institutionalization in international system. So what we need is integrity, inclusivity, institutionalization, interest optimization, and implementation of the decisions. Otherwise, we will be having many more meetings on this as a good exercise of intellectual exercise, but not result-oriented meetings. I hope all these discussions will open a way for global governance. Thank you very much. Very fast, like marathon.
Well, thank you very much, Ahmed, for this very exhaustive presentation where there is at least one thing that is obvious. It is that you like to teach. And I think that to be, after all, professor of international relations is more comfortable than to be a minister of foreign affairs or a prime minister, etc. So we are going to take 2 or 3 questions. So make them as provocative as possible. I see my friend Riyad Tabet and Madame, c'est qui? Ah, c'est Asia. Hein? C'est Asia elle-même. Je ne me trompe pas. Asia Alaoui from Morocco and Michel Fouché. And then I will have to stop, unfortunately. Riyad first.
Monsieur le Premier ministre,
But I cannot understand.
In English. On n'a pas de traduction là. En anglais, Riyad. On n'a pas de traduction ici.
Mr. Prime Minister, the military conflict in Syria is practically ending. The consequences of this conflict
Closer to you.
is a problem. One of the consequences is the problem of refugees. Lebanon shares with Turkey and other countries like Jordan this problem. Now, on the political run, a solution is negotiated. And meanwhile, the international community and ONG organizations are financing the refugees in the countries where they are. In Lebanon, for example, we have the third of the global population made from refugees. 1.5 million to 2 million, over 4 million people. Do you think that the financial through humanitarian UN organization should continue to finance these refugees where they are, in the countries where they are, or finance their return to Syria? And I don't see really a strategy or a plan for that. What do you think?
One by one, or?
I think it's better to take the three all questions together, yes, because of time. Assia Alaoui.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for your listing of the earthquakes. You have suggested that the regional balance and the global balance should come together just to put everybody together, the stakeholders you mean, in order to find the appropriate answers. Who you think would be capable of just bringing together everybody, since Mr. Trump has disqualified America because it has taken sides against Iran, since you are ruling out the United Nations. So what authority, who can do that? This is my first question. The second is related to Turkey's role. What role do you see for Turkey in this quagmire? Because it hasn't been that clear. It seems that Turkey has been playing on different registers and sometimes not very lisible to the rest of the community, whether be it in the West or in the rest of the Arab world. So could you please clarify that? Thank you.
Well, I'm glad that you have only two questions. Michel, as concise as possible.
Mr. Prime Minister, we always appreciate your comprehensive and intellectual view of geopolitical situation. I have a very practical and maybe provocative question. Is your country, Turkey, ready to think about a regional conference, Vienna Congress format style, inspiration maybe, on a new long-lasting regional order in the Middle East, where the first stakeholder will be Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel, I hope, and P5 countries in the back seats?
So I take now Mona Ebed from Egypt and also Ali Aslan because he's German but from Turkish origin. So and then I stop because Mona. Attends, il faut un micro. Là, il arrive.
Yes, Mona.
That gives you time to think about the answer.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. For years, Turkey was looked upon as a model in the region, as an Islamist democratic country. Today, Turkey is accused of financing and giving asylum to radical extremists. Can you explain why? Because this is part of the Qatar crisis that you mentioned. Thank you.
Merci. Ali Aslan here.
Thank you, Thierry, and great to see you again, Mr. Prime Minister. To be very short, as Thierry said, I'm a German of Turkish descent, and tomorrow morning we'll be discussing the future of Europe, and it's no shock, I'm not revealing any shocking news when I say that relations between Turkey and Europe could be better. There are even talks, and there's some pondering in Europe, whether Turkey still wants to be part of the European Union. I want to take advantage of your presence here today to hear an unequivocal statement and perhaps pledge whether Turkey still wants to take the road and down the path down to EU membership. Thank you.
5 minutes.
Okay, I will try. 6 questions. One was 2. 6 questions, 5 minutes is not fair to the questions.
5.5.
Thank you very much, Thierry. just for, since he had difficulty for my name, my last name, to clarify, Davutoglu. Davut means David. Oğlu means son in Turkish. So it is Davidson or bin Davut. It is easier to pronounce it. Anyway, about the refugees, I fully agree. There is no international strategy. Therefore, all the burden is on the shoulder, Riyadh's question, on the shoulder of the neighboring countries, Turkey, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan. There is an urgent need of an international conference about the strategy of refugees, Syrian refugees, but in general as well, refugees, because there are Libyans and others as well, how to deal with this question based on humanitarian values as well as financial aspects of this crisis. And the first priority should be going back home. But I am sure when Syrians see that Assad is still staying in Damascus, many Syrians will not go back. This is psychologically an influence on refugees everywhere. In Turkey, I know, because they escaped from a regime. Regime is still there. So that refugees strategy going back should be together with a plan, peace plan on the ground, guaranteed by international powers. Then they can go. Otherwise, today, no refugee will go back when the situation is so fragile. About Madam Asya Alevi's question, and one, Michel, I will connect. Turkish role, yes, we have a good example, what we achieved. In 2003, in our first days of our government, before Iraqi war, we established a platform, Iraqi Neighborhood Platform, where all the conflicting parties on Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, Jordan, Egypt, all of them were around the table. And this mechanism continued until 2008, and P5, after some time, became observer to this group, and this was a very successful example in order to minimize tensions between neighbors on Iraq and also create a consensus among them about territorial integrity and stability of Iraq, which was in the interest of everybody. About Turkish foreign policy, what you mentioned, and also there was another question about it. At the beginning, until Arab Spring, even until 2013, when Daesh came to the picture, when the terrorist, the oppressive regimes and terrorist organizations became two options for Arab people, not democratic choices, Turkish policy was proactive to establish a regional order. And I want to give an example about regional order. In 2010, in Arab League meeting, I was guest of honor, and I made a proposal to Arab League leaders, ministers, and later also to the summit, a new regional order like Vienna has been mentioned, Congress of Vienna, or Helsinki process, based on four principles: high-level political dialogue, today we don't have, unfortunately. Secondly, common security framework in the region. Third, economic interdependency. And fourth, multicultural coexistence. I think regional orders can base on these four principles. Without high-level political dialogue, especially in the Middle East, you cannot solve anything, because at the end of the day, leaders decide. And without economic interdependency, you cannot have stable, sustainable order. Economic interdependency is the best way of keeping peace. And a common security approach against terrorists is, or against any interstate tension, is a must. And also multicultural coexistence, especially in the cities. If you ask me which is the most dangerous situation, is divided cities like Berlin during Cold War. Today in Iraq, cities is being called Shiite city, Sunni city, Kurdish city. This is the biggest threat. So this could be the basis for a new regional order, and in UN system, between UN Security Council and UN General Assembly, there should be intermediary mechanisms where regional powers can come in to be like Astana process now going on in Syria. This is also another way or method to solve the issues. About terrorism, Turkey has been the model, and yes, without forgetting, this proactive policy has to be changed or forced to be changed after 2013, when Daesh came to the picture as a threatening against Turkey and terrorist organizations, when democratic wave in Middle East has been changed after coup d'etat in Egypt, and the old leaders start to come back and they had a confidence, like in Yemen, Salih, and the Arab Spring became a tension between oppressive leaders and terrorist organizations. The third option, a democratic transformation, has not been supported by international groups. Turkey had to change to a self-defensive position rather than proactive position, because we tried to keep our territory intact. Therefore, we had to make Euphrates Shield operation in Syria or in Iraq, extraterritorial operations, to defend ourselves. I usually do not prefer this as a strategy, but the fragile situation in the region forced Turkey to be in that status quo, and especially last year coup d'etat attempt in Turkey. And unfortunately, the silence of international community regarding this coup d'etat made Turkish political elite even much more self-defensive as psychology. What we need today in Turkey as well, an inclusive new long-term strategy of democratization and stability. We cannot continue with this self-defensive position. But at the same time, everybody should understand the trauma Turkey is facing to keep democracy surviving against the threats in the country, terrorist organizations and this religious cult of Gulen, or any other new attempt of coup d'etat, and also against instability forces coming outside. Lastly, about terrorism. There is Mona's question. I have to be very frank, Mona. We have to make a difference between terrorists and opposition. And there I am with Qatar. Al Jazeera, you may criticize, but without freedom of speech, without freedom of intellectual analysis, you cannot have democracy. Sustainable stability in the region can come only through democracy. And democracy means freedom of speech, freedom of press at the same time. We also face problems in Turkey, I know, but the issue calling Al Jazeera should be banned is not a way out. What is the solution? More dialogue. If you allow me, I want to give one striking example. In 2006, Ghannouchi came to Turkey as an intellectual, but as an opposition leader in exile, Rashid Ghannouchi from Tunisia. I knew him from academic life. We welcomed, we have spoken. Next day, Tunisian ambassador came to see me and said, a terrorist came to your country and you welcomed, he's a terrorist. I said, did you see Ghannouchi anywhere? He cannot kill even an insect. He said, in one of his demonstrations in 1991, some people were injured. I said, problem is, you don't make any separation between opposition and terror. If you tell all opposition as terrorists, then you cannot survive. We have to make a difference between these two. What happened? Now Ghannouchi is welcomed everywhere as the most moderate, most democratic wing of Islamists. And that diplomat has served in Tunisia even after Ghannouchi came back to Tunisia. What we need today is we have to be very hard against terrorists, Daesh, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, all type of terrorism. And as Turkey, we are with. I was in Paris, shoulder to shoulder with all European leaders when the incident in Paris, after the terrorist attack in Paris in early 2015. But at the same time, we should not be giving an impression that anybody who thinks different than the existing status quo is a terrorist. Then that definition of terrorist makes terrorists more happy. What we need today is inclusive approach to opposition in national, regional, or global level, more dialogue, more freedom, but be hard as much as possible against terrorists who are taking gun in his hand. who use violence against people. This should be a differentiation. Turkey, despite of all these difficulties, will continue to be, we hope, a good model and example for everybody. Thank you very much. I hope I answered all the questions. Sorry, Ali Aslan's question about Turkey EU. Please, Ali, don't think that this is my secondary issue. Turkey-European Union relation is not only important for Turkey and EU, but also is a peace model for interreligious, intercultural coexistence and harmony. Therefore, our government in 2002, the first strategy was making Turkey full member to EU. But in 2004, we got this decision. And unfortunately, after that, we had several difficulties. I don't want to blame this or that actor. But there is one thing clear. Turkey had to face many double standards, let me say, regarding Cyprus issue, regarding other issues. Despite of this, Turkey has continued. The last attempt, when I was re-elected as Prime Minister in 2015, 1st November, my first target was to rearrange Turkish-EU relations. And it was a success story on 18th of March. The deal between me and European leaders, Prime Minister Merkel, President Hollande, and all the leaders, and we achieved, not only, it was a strategic agreement, not only solving refugee issue, but putting Turkish-European Union track on the right path. Visa liberalization, adjustment of custom union, and all the other pending issues were in the package. And when I decided to resign, to leave my position, the first thing I did was I called Mr. Juncker, our close friend. I said, I am resigning, but you must continue this process. And in June, we were expecting to get visa liberalization. And I also told to the new Prime Minister of Turkey that this should be the most important priority for the new government. But unfortunately, after that, there was a huge tension, and Europeans did not fulfill any of these promises, despite of the refugee issues has been solved. And this, now what we have to do, all of us, instead of provocating emotional rhetoric between Turkey and EU, we have to be rational. Turkey needs EU. As a Turkish citizen, I am telling, we need. And nobody can separate, isolate Turkey from European continent. And European Union needs Turkey. The only thing is to sit around the table, put everything on the table in an honest manner, transparent manner, and start a new process. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ahmed. Now, if I try to pronounce your name correctly, it's Davutoglu.
Oh, yes.
That's better?
Better, much better. You passed the exam.
Thank you. So I am sure that I will speak in the name of everyone if first I wish you personally well, and if I wish Turkey well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
What's first? What was that?